Hello, my name is Mike, and I'm a CDL instructor and also a third-party CDL examiner for the state of Colorado. I've posted this video to help people know some of the ins and outs of a vehicle inspection when they're preparing for their Class A CDL license. Now, the videos that I've produced are for the vehicle inspection portion only so far. And a couple of things I wanted to point out, and I'm reading this directly out of my examiner's manual. For the inspection, it says there's no ideal or standard wording to describe what is being inspected. The use of a common or slang term of an item is acceptable. Use your judgment to decide when the applicant knows what they are talking about. If the applicant mentions most of the key points to look for on an item, this should be satisfactory. It is not necessary to make the applicant give a lengthy explanation on every inspection item. If the applicant seems to know the procedure but is not describing it clearly, ask for more detail. Do not probe if the applicant says nothing at all about an inspection item. So if you are doing your inspection and you, in passing, name an item and it doesn't seem like you're inspecting the item, we're not going to bring you back to that item. The only time we probe for more information is if it's clear that you're actually inspecting that item. Continuing on, these are my instructions as a tester. It says once the applicant has explained how to inspect an item that appears in several different places on the vehicle, the explanation need not be repeated every time they come to the item. For example, there are lug nuts on every wheel. Once the applicant has correctly explained what they are looking for when inspecting lug nuts, the same explanation does not have to be given every time a wheel is inspected. If an item has not been explained at least once, the driver only needs to mention its name and indicate that he or she is inspecting it. If the driver realizes that he or she has missed some items during the vehicle inspection, he or she should be permitted to go back to cover the missing items without penalty. So if you're on inspection 4, for example, and you're inspecting the trailer and you realize that you forgot something at the engine inspection, you can mention it and simply will go back to it and you'll get credit for that. The reason I put this video out is to help students and anybody else that wants to watch that and really have an idea what it sounds like when you're being tested and the things that are being looked at when you're doing the test. So best of luck to you. Leave a comment and I'll get back to you and respond to anybody that needs any information. Thank you. All right, now I want to talk a little bit about the overview on the inspection. The examiner is going to read from a standard overview your instructions on what to do. You're always able to ask questions. So if there's any part of it that you don't understand, it's not going to be any problem. The overview is going to sound like this. Please demonstrate that you know how to conduct a vehicle inspection as you would normally do for any vehicle that you are about to operate. You are to conduct a vehicle inspection as outlined in the CDL driver's manual. Now that's going to be in section 11 where they talk about the vehicle inspection. As you do your inspection, point to or touch the item or items you are inspecting and fully explain what you are inspecting on each item. If you do not do so, you will not get credit for that item. You will conduct a complete vehicle inspection. I will give you instructions prior to each portion to be inspected, and then they'll ask if you have any questions. But what they mean by you'll do a complete vehicle inspection means that we're going to start at the front of the vehicle and we're going to inspect the whole vehicle and end up at the back of the vehicle, but we're only going to inspect the driver's side. Once again, this inspection is a knowledge test. Of course, we are looking for things that may be wrong, things that may be broken, all of that sort of thing. But as an examiner, the examiner wants to know that the vehicle is in safe operating conditions so that when you get to the drive portion of the test, the road test, that the vehicle is ready to go. The examiner doesn't have the authority to place the vehicle out of order, but they do have the authority to not drive a vehicle if they feel like it is unsafe. So the first inspection instructions are going to be like this. First, inspect all items on the front of the vehicle and the engine compartment area, including all steering components as well as all items on the front driver's side axle. If there are any items that are unique to the other side of the vehicle, please inspect those items. And so when you're at the front of the vehicle, you want to walk up to the vehicle, check underneath it, make sure nothing is leaking from the vehicle. Also, look at the overall condition to make sure that there's nothing broken or damaged, that everything appears to be normal. Anything that seems like it may be out of place or not correct, you want to investigate further. Also, check your lights to make sure that the lenses are not cracked, chipped, or broken, that they're clear, and all the hardware that attaches them to the vehicle is in place. So like the overview said, we're going to inspect the engine compartment. We're going to start on the passenger side. The first item I'm going to inspect is the alternator. We want to make sure that the alternator is securely attached. All of the connecting hardware is in place. Also, the wires that are attached to the back side are connected firmly and secure, and that none of the wires have any cuts in the insulation. There's no exposed conductors. We're also going to inspect the body of the alternator to make sure it's not cracked or broken. Also the belt, we want to inspect the belt. We want to make sure that it's not cracked, coming apart in any way, that the total deflection when you push in or pull out is not more than 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch. And then once again, look inside to make sure that the inside part of the belt is not cracked. We're also going to inspect the water pump. In this example, gear driven, and this is the gear drive assembly that I'm pointing to here. When we're inspecting the water pump, we're inspecting it for any broken, cracked, damaged parts or pieces. We want to make sure that all the connecting hardware is in place. We're also inspecting it for no leaks. So coolant hoses going up to it, we're inspecting those to make sure no fluid is coming out in the front and in the back. I mentioned it was gear driven. The alternator, you want to mention that it is belt driven. So now we're on the driver's side of the vehicle. Over here, I can check all of the fluid levels on this particular model. We'll start with the coolant level. In this truck, we have a transparent coolant reservoir. I can check the level. I can also tell that the color is adequate. It's at the proper level. Also, I'm checking to make sure that there's no leaks from the reservoir, that the hose that attaches to it is properly secure, the clamp is tight, the hose doesn't have any leaks to it, so we're good there. This is where I check the oil. Simply pull the stick out, check to make sure that it doesn't need any oil. If it is down below the add mark, you would put 1 gallon in it. If you do need to add oil, this is the oil fill. Here's our power steering fluid. This reservoir is also transparent and it has lines on the side, maximum and minimum, maximum for hot, minimum for cold. So it is at its proper level. Washer fluid reservoir right here. It has a little over 1/4 full, so we're good there. So you want to make sure all of your fluid levels are adequate. Now on the engine portion, we're going to continue on with the air compressor. The air compressor has coolant lines and air lines attached to it, so you're checking for fluid leaks or any audible air leaks. On this truck, there are none. We're also looking at the compressor to make sure that it's not cracked, broken, or damaged, that it's mounted securely and properly, and it's attached to the gear drive assembly, so you want to mention it's gear driven. From there, we're going to move on to the power steering pump. The power steering pump is gear driven. Once again, this is the gear drive assembly or your accessory drive. We're inspecting that once again for any broken parts or pieces, connecting hardware, bolts, missing, that sort of thing. And then fluid leaks, we're checking for fluid leaks. I'm also looking at the power steering hoses that coming to and from gearbox, and then also the reservoir. Checking to make sure there's no abrasions, bulges, and cuts. They're firmly attached from the clamps and they're tight, secure, no leaking. And inspect the steering shaft. We want to make sure that it's not bent or damaged. Checking for the amount of free play. That needs to be a maximum of 10%. We're checking the U-joint that connects to the steering gearbox to make sure that it doesn't have any play in it. Looking at the gearbox assembly itself, making sure that it's not cracked or broken, that there's no fluid leaks. Also, the bolts that connect it to the frame are all in place and it's mounted tightly to the frame. From there, we're going to check the pitman arm, the drag link, the upper control arm, and the lower control arm. We're checking to make sure that these components are not bent, cracked, or damaged. Also that the connecting hardware, the castle nuts, and the cotter pins are all in place. That's a requirement for steering components. Next, we're going to inspect the brakes. The brake inspection begins at the hose. We want to make sure that the hose is securely fastened and that there's no abrasions, bulges, cuts. It's not weathered. We'll also check for any air leaks, audible air leaks. From there, we're going to look at the brake chamber. We want to make sure that the brake chamber is securely fastened to the mounting bracket, that the bolts are in place, that the bracket itself is not cracked or damaged, and also that the chamber itself is not cracked, bent, or damaged. And once again, that we hear no audible air leaks. From here, we're going to look at the push rod that comes out of the brake chamber. You want to make sure that the push rod is connected to the slack adjuster with the proper hardware. These pins are designed to swivel and they have a little cotter key in place to keep them from backing out. You're looking at the slack adjuster also to make sure that it's securely fastened and it's not broken or damaged. Another check is you want to make sure that the slack adjuster and the push rod are at about a 90-degree angle to one another. And also with the brakes released, you can check or less than 1 inch. The brake lining is right in here. You're looking at the brake lining to make sure that it's not excessively worn. Generally, you want at least 1/4 of an inch of brake lining. Also check your drum to make sure the drum is not cracked or damaged, that it's not discolored, turning blue from excessive heating. And you can also put your finger inside and feel the drum surface to make sure that it's nice and smooth. Also look inside this area of the hub to make sure that the inner hub seal is not leaking fluid inside the brake components. While we're inside here, we're looking at the wheel, making sure that the wheel is not cracked, broken, or damaged, or bent. We're looking at the inside part of the sidewall of the tire to make sure it's properly beaded to the wheel. And then we'll look at the outside part of the sidewall to make sure it has no abrasions, bulges, or cuts, no exposed thread, no embedded objects. Now we're inspecting the tread portion of the front tire. Front tires in most applications are required to be virgin or non-retreaded tires. We want to make sure that there's no unusual patterns of tread wear, and also to make sure that the tread depth is a minimum 4/32. We've already covered the sidewall of the tire. I've looked at that. There's no damage, no abrasions, bulges, or cuts. The outside part of the wheel, there's no bent parts or cracks or damage, so the wheel is okay. Looking at the lug nuts, you want to check the lug nuts with a lug wrench. If you don't have a lug wrench, just feel around on each lug to make sure that there's no loose lugs. Indicator that the lug may be loose. You may see a rust trail, and then if the lug is loose, there may be shiny threads on the stud itself. We're also looking at the hub. We want to make sure that the oil inside the hub is of the proper level by removing this cap. Now during the inspection, you don't have to dismantle anything or take anything apart. Just describe what you would do during your pre-trip. We also have a valve stem down here. You can check the inflation of the tire either with a mallet by thumping on the tire, or checking it with an air gauge, and the amount of air is going to be designated on the sidewall of the tire.